John, it's now just 1 week to training camp, and what a training camp it should be. I mean, we're all looking for, obviously better play and better structure on offense and a different type of offense and all that. We're also very much looking forward to what gets said specifically next week, midweek, when the guys get together and they have their first media sessions and we hear from Sirianni and we hear from Hurts. And, I mean, that's going to be fascinating. Here's what was very interesting yesterday that came out by way of ESPN compiling a list of NFL executives, coaches, and scouts. And they had 80 different executive coaches and scouts that weighed in. Top 10 players at all sorts of positions, and the quarterbacks have been unveiled. And Jalen Hurts, John, according to the executives, the coaches, and the scouts of the NFL, Jalen Hurts not in the top 10.
That's a travesty.
And I want to get, John, I want to get your reaction and everyone's reaction.
A betrayal of the truth.
215-592-9494. So let me first detail the list, and then we'll get John's reaction and everyone here. So here's the list again. This is NFL coaches, executives, and scouts. We don't know how many general managers. We don't know how many head coaches. We don't know how many coordinators. But we know this is what ESPN is calling executives, coaches, and scouts. And their list for top 10 QB goes as follows. Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow 2, Josh Allen is 3, Lamar Jackson 4, Matthew Stafford 5. That's your top 5. Okay, here's 6 through 10. Justin Herbert, C.J. Stroud, Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, and Dak Prescott. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take your reaction to the news.
This is a joke,
Joe.
That
ahead,
does
Joe.
sound idiotic to you, doesn't it?
No.
Like when this rings and you hear Jared Goff coming in at 9, like that does discredit this list.
That's the one that I would say is most questionable. I mean, here's the thing. He certainly outplayed Jalen Hurts down the stretch last year. I never would have conceived a year ago that there would be a point in human history when any human alive would consider Jared Goff better than Jalen Hurts. But I know this second half of the season he certainly was. Now it doesn't mean he will be moving forward. Doesn't mean he empirically speaking is, but Jalen really took an enormous step backwards last year. And
he
John,
did.
And
he
John,
did.
Go
and
ahead.
you have to account for that. I think they overreacted. They over-adjusted for that, downturn in play by Jalen. Yes, there was a downturn. I don't think he should be outside the top 10. I think that this list is going by is the ESPN sort of world of their QBR, where that, as I understand it, they weight certain plays, based on their importance, and it's somewhat subjective in the way that those people grade those plays out. So, the way that you feel about the player does affect the final grade. I prefer the PFF grading, where you've got former coaches and scouts and, people on staff going and grading tape. It's just, a different way of evaluating.
But John, when they graded Jalen's tape at the end of the year, it stunk. I mean, that Tampa Bay game,
I understand.
He really stunk.
Yes, it did. It was poor. Everyone saw how poor it was. Everyone saw how befuddling it was that we didn't have a plan against the blitz. It wasn't just Jalen. It was our team. It was the wide receivers weren't changing their routes. No one was adjusting. The O-line wasn't changing the protection when things were overloaded. It was the Eagles' offense was, quote, stale. I mean, in my mind, the Eagles' offense was rudimentary and dumb and wrong to try to pull off what they tried to pull off with their protection system last year, which was basically, Jalen, we're going to let you go run and use your abilities. I actually think I can remember, didn't Nick say at some point Jalen's superpowers? Jalen used his superpowers to get out of that one. It was almost like that was their protection plan. Jalen used his superpowers to escape and get a pass off.
John, you know my theory. I wish we really knew how much was bonehead coaching and how much was trying to coach around
and we don't
their
know.
Perception of Hurts' weaknesses.
I do know that the way he graded out, according to the PFF grades last season, was Jalen was number 8. Jalen was number 8 out of all the quarterbacks in the NFL. I think that makes more sense based on how he played than him being outside the top 10, which is the way that this Fowler list goes.
Here's where I'm at on Hurts as it relates to a ranking. And we talked about this earlier in the summer, and I'll say it again. I mean, I would have Jalen somewhere in the 9 to 12 range. So, you know, in my opinion, this concept of him being outside the top 10, it's not outrageous. I mean, I know this. The only two I would consider elevating Jalen over that were in this top 10 were Justin Herbert and Jared Goff. I mean, Goff obviously, you know, was basically his NFL starting career was on life support until about a year or so ago. So good job by him resuscitating his career. Great job by him. Herbert, you know, I've never been convinced of. And I mean, I've just never seen him win a big game. I've never been convinced. But so those are two guys.
He was outside the top 10 on the PFF grading.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite get.
Incidentally,
yeah,
he was 11.
The Herbert love, I've never gotten. But
the love is because his arm is unbelievable.
No, I understand that.
His arm is off the charts.
But
out of sight.
So is Jeff George.
Jeff George.
I understand,
arm.
but Jeff George wasn't a top 10 QB. Like
you're right.
Obviously, Herbert.
This guy has the potential to be, and he's not a head case like Jeff George was.
So Herbert and Goff, I would certainly consider putting Jalen above them. But I got to tell you, me right now, with what I saw last year, I would put Brock Purdy above Hurts. And while I didn't see Jordan Love quite enough to like truly know, when I was watching that guy down the stretch, I was very impressed. So my inclination is I would take Jordan Love over Jalen. I think the concept of where to put Jalen is number 11. I would have Hurts above Kirk Cousins. I would have him above Trevor Lawrence. You know, I'll flip him above Herbert and Goff. But I'm going to keep him outside the top 10 because I'm going to elevate Brock Purdy and I'm going to elevate Jordan Love and say, away we go.
Your list is a mess.
I'm just telling you, John. I mean,
you're telling me
John,
you're wrong.
Let me put it this way. Dak Prescott's definitely. Here's the most basic way I can put it. Dak Prescott is definitely going to be an NFL starting quarterback in 4 or 5 years. I don't know that Hurts is. In 4 or 5 years, I have no idea if Jalen Hurts is starting NFL quarterback. And I know we're talking about the right now, but what I'm getting at is, similar to Carson, I wonder how much the decline we've already seen will set in motion a real alteration of how he's viewed in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years. I mean, you guys know my theory. I think for him to re-elevate back to where he was, and he certainly was the top 5, top 3 quarterback 2 years ago. There's no doubt about it. I think he's got to do one of two things. Has to. Cannot be a top 5, top 7 quarterback. Cannot, unless he does one of two things. Ideally, he doesn't both, but has to do at least one of two. Either become a lot better in the passing game. Everything that represents. Pocket presence, full field reads, moving progression 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, actually checking the ball down to running backs, all that sort of not leaving the pocket unnecessarily. Like, he's got to either, because his arm is fine. Okay, his arm is fine. But he's either got to be
He needs someone teaching him the proper way to go through those progressions. Now we're learning that he might not have even had those progressions the way that, like, the West Coast offense normally operates.
Look, I know there was a simplicity.
The protection was crazy last year.
Wow.
That I can't believe that's what our team put out there on the field, but they did.
And you blame
they thought it would work.
You blame it primarily on Sirianni, right?
Yes.
Primarily.
Yes, because he's the guy at the helm who's running it.
And I tend to think Sirianni was coaching around what he perceives as Hurts' deficiencies. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I could be right. I'm just telling you, John.
Don't you think that's a step just too far?
I mean, it depends on how deficient Hurts is.
Does he deficient? Why is it that Jalen is deficient?
Why did DeAndre Swift have a full season here and never catch the ball out of the backfield? Why did the quarterback never throw the ball to the running back who's a good out of the backfield catcher? Why?
I don't know.
Because he doesn't get to it. That's why.
How do you know that? How do you know what order the progression goes in?
You see a full season in DeAndre.
If you've got a good wide receiver, if you've got a good tight end, you get him the ball. If you've got a good running back, you design screens and Texas routes and angle routes, option routes to get him the ball. I don't understand why he wasn't included more, because that is in his skill set.
And it goes for Goddard and Swift, because both of them, frankly.
They both should have been included more. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Well, so look, we'll take your reaction on Jalen outside the top 10. Again, I think Hurts either has to be a lot better in the passing game, or option 2 is just run a lot more and run a lot better, which is something he certainly did in his earliest years.
The problem is he's being penalized for last season where he played hurt. He played hurt all of last season, and you'll recall he put that brace on. No one talked about it. It was underneath the uniform. No one. We all knew it looked somewhat different. He wasn't getting the edge. He wasn't quite as fast. He wasn't quite as bursty. Why did it look different? We didn't know.
But why did he look different in game 1, John? Because it looked to me
he was hurt.
So he got hurt in training camp before he got...
Apparently, yes.
See, that's what makes no sense, John.
No, here's what doesn't make sense. He plays football. Injuries happen in practice and whatnot. They happen all the time. It doesn't make sense for us to assume he was perfectly healthy when he was playing like a player who was protecting something.
Well, he did look different.
He was playing like a player who was adjusting for an injury, and he was certainly a step slower. And now he's penalized for that on top of everything else, on top of the fact that he didn't have a proper protection system keeping him in the pocket. You complain about him leaving the pocket. I would have left it too, with the whole world collapsing in my face. It's not on him as much as you put it on him.
Here's the deal. 215-592-9494 for everyone to weigh in. It's such an important year for Jalen Hurts and obviously for the Eagles. Fair or unfair for NFL executives, coaches, and scouts to deem Jalen Hurts not a top 10 quarterback? Fair or unfair, accurate or not? You tell us. Joe DeCamara and Jon Ritchie.
Unfair, Joe. So unfair.
It's 94 WIP.